Hi guys, welcome back to another video on the Sign of 4. Today we're going to look at chapter 11, the Great Agro Treasure, but before we do, let's just really quickly recap chapter 10, because it's been a week, so let's make sure we remember everything that's happened. So in chapter 10, Watson and Holmes chase down Jonathan Small and his friend Tonga. Tonga gets shot, ends up falling into the river. Holmes and Watson observe Jonathan Small hunched over, doing something they can't quite work out what it is. Towards the end of the chase, Jonathan Small's boat runs aground at the side of the River Thames. He jumps off, gets stuck in the mud, and Holmes and Watson are able to apprehend him. Now in chapter 11, we are going to get our first proper view of Jonathan Small. And similar to the other characters that are introduced in this novel, he is given a lengthy physical description before his character starts to talk and reveal his personality. In this chapter, we're also going to find out the fate of the Agro Treasure. We're going to see what's happened to it. And towards the end of the chapter, we get the complete resolution of the relationship between Watson and Mary Morstan. And through that resolution, the ideas around class and attitude towards women that have been developed throughout this novel are kind of fully explored and fully resolved. Okay, let me just minimize this. All right, remembering again, as always, the numbers at the top, please be including them. This is quite a short chapter, as I'm sure you can see, so hopefully this will be quite a short video. Okay, so our captive sat in the cabin opposite to the iron box which he had done so much and waited so long to gain. He was a sunburned, reckless-eyed fellow with a network of lines and wrinkles all over his mahogany features, which told of a hard, open-air life. There was a singular prominence about his bearded chin which marked a man who was not to be easily turned from his purpose. His age may have been 50 or thereabouts, for his black, curly hair was thickly shot with grey. His face, in repose, was not an unpleasing one, though his heavy brows and aggressive chin gave him, as I had lately seen, a terrible expression when moved to anger. He sat now with his handcuffed hands upon his lap and his head sunk upon his breast, while he looked with his keen, twinkling eyes at the box which had been the cause of his ill-doings. It seemed to me that there was more sorrow than anger in his rigid and contained countenance. Once he looked up at me with a gleam of something like humour in his eyes. "Well, Jonathan Small," said Holmes, lighting a cigar, "I am sorry that it has come to this." "And so am I, sir," he answered frankly. "I don't believe that I can swing over the job. I give you my word on the book that I never raised hand against Mr. Sholto. It was that little hellhound Tonga who shot one of his cursed darts into him. I had no part in it, sir. I was as grieved as if it had been my blood relation. I welted the little devil with the slack end of the rope for it, but it was done, and I could not undo it again." Okay, so then this is our first description of Jonathan Small. So we have to think a little bit about this. How does Watson's bias affect the description that he has of Jonathan Small? Bearing in mind this is the man that they've been trying to catch. This is a man that, if you put the pieces of the puzzle together, has been working, or had been working, with indigenous people against the British Empire, who potentially had been involved in the murder of a rich, influential person. So Watson is going to be biased in his description. And let's look at some of that. So he uses the word captive, he's been caught. So he's sunburned. That talks of his days working in the colonies, working in India. And this reckless-eyed fellow, this metaphor talks about how Jonathan Small is a bit of a risk taker, that he has very little concern over his personal well-being. We then see that he's lined and wrinkled all over with mahogany features. This talks of the trouble that maybe Jonathan Small has seen, the trouble that he has experienced in his life. As we'll find out when we get to chapter 12, Jonathan Small really hasn't had a very nice life at all. So the idea that he's stubborn, his bearded chin, and this is a little bit of Watson's bias. The fact that he's bearded marks him as a stubborn man. I don't really understand how he puts those two things together, but I mean, it is a correct assumption about Jonathan Small. He is pretty stubborn. 50, grey, all that kind of stuff. Repose, just to clarify, repose, that means calm. So when he was calm, he seemed okay, he was a nice guy to look at. However, his heavy brows and aggressive chin, noting this personification of aggressive chin, led him to have a terrible expression when moved to anger. Now think about, one of the big things that I've talked about through this novel is duality of character. And within Jonathan Small's first description, we are given an indication that there is a duality in his character. When he's calm, he's nice, he's okay. But at the same time, he has the capacity to be aggressive and scary and quite violent, as we'll find out when we get to Jonathan Small's confession. So there is this duality within him, and that will be explored a lot more. So his head was sunk upon his breast. He is defeated. That is the image of somebody that is defeated. He recognises that Holmes and Watson have bested him. He has lost. However, he's described as having these twinkling eyes, which I think it's a nice point of reference. If anything comes up about Jonathan Small, then that might be something to bear in mind to use to compare him to Holmes. And this isn't to say that Jonathan Small and Holmes are the same character or have the same characteristics, but they both have obsessions. Holmes's obsession is with solving crimes. Jonathan Small's obsession is with revenge and getting the Agra treasure back. So maybe there is some link there. So this is a nice reference here. So there was more sorrow than anger in his rigid and contained countenance. Just to clarify, countenance here, so this is his facial expression. It's quite a common Victorian word that you will see. Certainly as well, in the poem My Last Duchess, there is reference to countenance, meaning the Duchess's face. So just bear that in mind. But this talks about regret. And I think there are lots of things that Jonathan Small has to regret. One of those being his past life, the things that he ended up having to do and the things that happened to him. Kind of spoiler alert before we get to chapter 12, but the reason he only has one leg is because while swimming in the Ganges working for the British Army, he gets his leg bitten off by a crocodile. It's things like that. But his past life is pretty tragic. It could be the fact that he has not got the treasure. That could be the regret. It could also be regret of what has actually happened to Tonga, because they were friends, and he does allude to the idea that he and Tonga were very close. So it could be that. He's brought Tonga to England, and that's ended up with Tonga being killed. So lots of regrets in Jonathan Small's life. Now, we need to think a little about symbolism with the next point. So a cigar. Holmes is lighting a cigar. Again, this could be lots of different things. This cigar could be symbolic of victory. It's something that people do when they have won something or when they have completed something. It could also be a phallic imagery. We've talked a little bit about phallic imagery, particularly when looking at feminist critical theory. Phallic imagery, these are strong masculine images that represent male genitalia. It's symbolism. And linking with that, if it is phallic, then potentially that links with the patriarchy. Cigars, they're expensive items. They are considered a luxury. They're also very masculine items, bearing in mind women didn't really smoke in the Victorian era. So just bear in mind that symbolism. And also, there was the cigar in chapter 9, I think it was, when they're having a smoke with Athelney Jones. So there are those things. Right, now Jonathan Small, he uses the word sir when talking to Sherlock Holmes. This shows that he's respectful. And he doesn't believe that he can swing. This would be a Victorian idiom to mean execution by hanging. So Jonathan Small doesn't feel that he can be executed for what's happened because he maintains that he had no had no impact on the killing of Bartholomew Sholto. It wasn't him, basically. A little bit of religious imagery here. So I give you my word on the book. He's talking about the Bible. This shows a connection between honour and religion. If you go into a courtroom and you give a statement, you need to swear on a Bible. Or nowadays, not necessarily a Bible, but you have to swear on something that you're telling the truth. So Jonathan Small here is trying to persuade Holmes that he had nothing to do with Bartholomew Sholto's death by using some religious imagery. And then contrasting that, he talks about Tonga being a little hellhound. So this is the opposite in the religious imagery, evoking images of hell. Also linking Tonga with animal imagery, something that we have seen a lot, something that talks about Victorian bias, something that evokes Victorian fear in the reader. So this, he welted the little devil with the slack end of the rope. This just shows that he was capable of violence. Next. Ooh, let me just pop that down. Brilliant. So, just before we read this page, think about how Holmes tries to get Jonathan Small to talk. Bear in mind, what Holmes wants now is to find out exactly what happened, to see how right he was. That's all that Holmes wants here. So think about how does Sherlock Holmes try to persuade Jonathan Small to talk, and how Jonathan Small is still attached to some Victorian ideals. He is other, and again, that's a phrase that we've talked about before, other people existing outside of society. Jonathan Small does exist outside of society, but he still maintains some Victorian ideals. So just as I read this page, think a little bit about that. Okay. "Have a cigar," said Holmes, "and you had best take a pull out of my flask, for you are very wet. How could you expect so small and weak a man as this black fellow to overpower Mr. Sholto and hold him while you were climbing the rope? You seem to know as much about it as if you were there, sir. The truth is that I hoped to find the room clear. I knew the habits of the house pretty well, and it was the time when Mr. Sholto usually went down to his supper. I shall make no secret of the business. The best defence that I can make is just the simple truth. Now, if it had been the old Major, I would have swung for him with a light heart. I would have thought no more of knifing him than of smoking this cigar. But it's cursed hard that I should be lagged over this young Sholto, with whom I had no quarrel whatever. You are under the charge of Mr. Athelney Jones of Scotland Yard. He is going to bring you up to my rooms, and I shall ask you for a true account of the matter. You must make a clean breast of it, for if you do, I hope that I may be of use to you. I think I can prove that the poison acts so quickly that the man was dead before ever you reached the room." "That he was, sir. I never got such a turn in my life as when I saw him grinning at me with his head on his shoulder as I climbed through the window. It fairly shook me, sir. I'd have half killed Tonga for it if he had not scrambled off. That was how he came to leave his club and some of his darts too, as he tells me, which I dare say helped to put you on our track, though how you kept on it is more than I can tell. I don't feel no malice against you for it, but it seems a queer thing," he added, with a bitter smile. Okay, we'll stop there. So here, straight away, Holmes is trying to be generous to try and make Jonathan Small talk. And again, think about the symbolism of that cigar. If it is phallic to represent masculinity, if it is a symbol of the patriarchy, then by offering a cigar to Jonathan Small, Sherlock Holmes is recognising his masculinity to try and create some kind of level playing field. I'm a man, you're a man, we can both smoke cigars. Or similarly, if it's to represent the patriarchy, then maybe Holmes is trying to say to Jonathan Small, the patriarchy is willing to take you under its wing a little bit. And Holmes pretty much says so in this page. that he will try and help Jonathan Small as much as he can. So this straight away sets up kind of a rapport between Holmes and Jonathan Small, in which Holmes hopes he can needle out the information. More then on class and honour, that Jonathan Small calls Sherlock Holmes Sir, all that kind of stuff. We find out as well that Jonathan Small had been watching the house for quite a while. I knew the habits of the house pretty well. This links with the idea of obsession and vengeance. Jonathan Small isn't just a petty criminal who happened to be in the vicinity. This is a planned operation in which he's determined to get the treasure back. Now, Jonathan Small tries to be honest here. He says the best defence that I can make is just the simple truth. And that's a good quotation to remember for Jonathan Small, because it talks about an honour that certain other characters in this story lack, I think. And I'm talking particularly about Major Sholto. Major Sholto is not an honest character. He's a liar. Whereas Jonathan Small is trying to present himself as a very honest character. In that way, we could even think about there being kind of a dichotomy between these two characters. And interestingly enough, it's just occurred to me, Jonathan Small's initials are JS, and Major James Sholto's initials are also JS, which is something I've never really thought about before, which is very interesting. I'll have a think about that. So Jonathan Small is trying to show that he is honest, as I say, in direct contrast to Major Sholto. So this here shows exactly how much he hated Sholto. I would have thought no more of knifing him than of smoking this cigar. He would have very easily killed Major Sholto. So now Holmes is trying to get Jonathan Small to do a true confession, and just to comment that a clean breast of it. This is a metaphor to mean get it off his chest, to have a clean heart. And as I've said before, Holmes is trying to clear Small because he only cares about justice. Holmes doesn't care that Jonathan Small has robbed the treasure. He doesn't see that as an excuse to try and fit him up for any more than he's actually done. He wants the right people arrested for the right things, and that's it. He doesn't bear grudges. He doesn't treat them negatively. Okay. So now we have some irony here. All along, Jonathan Small has been portrayed as this violent, evil killer, but when presented with the body of Bartholomew Sholto, he says, "I never got such a turn in my life as when I saw him grinning at me." So this is ironic because it shows that Jonathan Small was as scared as Holmes and Watson when they looked through the keyhole and saw the grinning face as well. And I think this is where we start to see that although he is other, he is still in some ways connected to Victorian society. This barbaric murder of a man that he had no grudge against is just as shocking to him as a white British person as all other white British people. He responds in the same way as Holmes and Watson, which is very far from the image that Major Sholto gives of this bearded monster chasing him down, trying to kill him. Now we get lots and lots of details resolved, that Tonga had lost the clubs because he ran away, all that kind of stuff. Now this is another Victorian value. He says to Sherlock Holmes, "I don't feel no malice against you for it." This is, he's trying to be a good sport. He feels that it is a fair cop. Sherlock Holmes caught him using traditional detective methods. There's not been any underhandedness or betrayal. It was just somebody had to win, and Sherlock Holmes is the one that's won. So Jonathan Small doesn't feel bad about it. Now this irony that Jonathan Small was as scared as Holmes and Watson, this helps us sympathise with Jonathan Small as he is still from Victorian society, with some of the same fears. Jonathan Small, even though he was a convict in the Andamans, he was a soldier in the British Army. He lived in England. He is a part of Victorian society. He's just a damaged part of Victorian society. Let's continue now. So, that I, who have a fair claim to nigh on 500,000 of money, should spend the first half of my life building a breakwater in the Andamans, and am like to spend the other half digging drains at Dartmoor. It was an evil day for me when I first clapped eyes upon the merchant Achmet, and had to do with the Agra treasure, which never brought anything but a curse yet upon the man who owned it. To him it brought murder, to Major Sholto it brought fear and guilt. To me it has meant slavery for life. At this moment Athelney Jones thrust his broad face and heavy shoulders into the cabin. "Quite a family party," he remarked. "I think I shall have a pull at that flask, Holmes. Well, I think we may all congratulate each other. Pity we didn't take the other alive, but there was no choice. I say, Holmes, you must confess that you cut it rather fine. It was all we could do to overhaul her." "All is well that ends well," said Holmes, "but I certainly did not know that the Aurora was such a clipper. Smith says she is one of the fastest launches on the river, and that if he had had another man to help him with the engines, we should never have caught her. He swears he knew nothing of this Norwood business." "Neither he did," cried our prisoner. "Not a word. I chose his launch because I heard that she was the flyer. We told him nothing, but we paid him well, and he was to get something handsome if we reached our vessel, the Esmeralda, at Gravesend, outward bound for the Brazils. Well, if he has done no wrong, we shall see that no wrong comes to him. If we are pretty quick in catching our men, we are not so quick in condemning them." It was amusing to notice how the consequential Jones was already beginning to give himself airs on the strength of the capture. Okay, we'll stop there a second. A few things to go through then. So then we find a little bit about Jonathan Small, a little bit more. The name Achmet, the merchant Achmet's name is revealed. That he was building a breakwater in the Andamans and all that kind of stuff. Here, we're given some of Jonathan Small's superstition. He believes that the treasure brings a curse upon people. And to be fair, he's got a point. You know, that Achmet was murdered, Major Sholto was fearful and guilty his entire life, and Jonathan Small was a slave for life. Now let's think a little bit about the images here. So this would have been telling for a Victorian audience, as it talks of a white man being treated like a slave. There was still slavery in the world at this time. There most definitely would have been slavery within the colonies, forced slavery. But this also might be something else. So this could be Jonathan Small being in prison and being forced to work, but at the same time, it might refer to him being a slave to his revenge. That Jonathan Small has spent his entire life after the Agra Treasure incident being fixated on this revenge, being driven by this revenge, unable to just let it go and continue living his life. He is consumed by it. And so, we could definitely think about that reference there as to mean one of two things. Right, so then more Athelney Jones, broad face, heavy shoulders. Yeah, easy. Holmes quotes Shakespeare here, "All is well that ends well." That shows intellect, it shows character, education, all that kind of stuff. It's also quite a flippant attitude that as long as it ended well, it doesn't matter what happened between the beginning and the end. But, I think that's just Holmes's personality. Here, we see some solidarity between working class people. Jonathan Small does not want to get Smith into trouble. Mordecai Smith, the guy who was driving the Aurora, he doesn't want him to get into trouble. He wants to protect him somewhat. And, yeah, he didn't tell him any of the plan. However, this is a really good point to make. If Athelney Jones comes up, if attitude towards the police comes up, we have some dramatic irony, because we as the audience know something that the character Jonathan Small does not know. And here we have Athelney Jones saying, "If we are pretty quick in catching our men, we are not so quick in condemning them." This is a completely hypocritical thing for him to say. He arrived at Pondicherry Lodge and as good as instantly arrested Thaddeus Sholto for the murder of Bartholomew Sholto. He, in that instance, was pretty quick in catching who he thought was his man, and he was quick in condemning them. Now, this might talk about Athelney Jones having a change of heart, but really, I think it is Athelney Jones just trying to appear like a nice guy, just trying to appear like he cares, when really he doesn't care. And then this reference airs on the strength of the capture. You know, Watson notes that Athelney Jones is beginning to give himself airs on the strength of capture. This shows that that Athelney Jones wants to take the credit for the capture, and that is seen when he uses the phrase "if we are pretty quick in catching our men," to kind of try and make it seem like him and Sherlock Holmes have been working together for the whole time, when they really haven't. You know, only very recently, towards the end of the novel, does Athelney Jones even concede that Sherlock Holmes knows what he's talking about. Okay. From the light smile which played over Sherlock Holmes's face, I could see that the speech had not been lost upon him. I'm not highlighted it, but just to finish there, this shows that Holmes recognises that this is Athelney Jones being hypocritical. And interestingly, if the audience knows it as well, then that kind of makes us a little bit more like Sherlock Holmes. Okay, so let me just finish. So we will be at Vauxhall Bridge presently, said Jones, and shall land you, Dr. Watson, with the treasure box. I need hardly tell you that I am taking a very grave responsibility upon myself in doing this. It is most irregular, but of course an agreement is an agreement. I must, however, as a matter of duty, send an inspector with you, since you have so valuable a charge. You will drive, no doubt. Yes, I shall drive. It is a pity there is no key, that we may make an inventory first. You will have to break it open. Where is the key, my man? At the bottom of the river, said Small shortly. There is no use your giving this unnecessary trouble. We have had work enough already through you. However, Doctor, I need not warn you to be careful. Bring the box back with you to the Baker Street rooms. You will find us there on our way to the station. They landed me at Vauxhall with a heavy iron box and with a bluff, genial inspector as my companion. A quarter of an hour's drive brought us to Mrs. Cecil Forrester's. The servant seemed surprised at so late a visitor. Mrs. Cecil Forrester was out for the evening, she explained, and likely to be very late. Miss Morstan, however, was in the drawing-room. So to the drawing-room I went, box in hand, leaving the obliging inspector in the cab. Okay, not very much on this page at all. This is just sort of exposition, details of the story. But this, Jonathan Small talking about the key being at the bottom of the river, foreshadows something else being at the bottom of the river, which we'll find out in a second. She was seated by the open window, dressed in some sort of white diaphanous material, with a little touch of scarlet at the neck and waist. The soft light of a shaded lamp fell upon her as she leaned back in the basket chair, playing over her sweet grave face, and tinting with a dull metallic sparkle the rich coils of her luxuriant hair. One white arm and hand drooped over the side of the chair, and her whole pose and figure spoke of an absorbing melancholy. At the sound of my footfall she sprang to her feet, however, and a bright flush of surprise and of pleasure coloured her pale cheeks. "I heard a cab drive up," she said. "I thought that Mrs. Forrester had come back very early, but I never dreamed it might be you. What news have you brought me?" "I have brought something better than news," said I, putting down the box upon the table and speaking jovially and boisterously, though my heart was heavy within me. "I have brought you something which is worth all the news in the world. I have brought you a fortune." She glanced at the iron box. "Is that the treasure, then?" she asked, coolly enough. "Yes, this is the great Agra treasure. Half of it is yours, and half is Thaddeus Sholto's. You'll have a couple of 100,000 each. Think of that! An annuity of £10,000. There'll be fewer richer young ladies in England. Is it not glorious?" I think that I must have been rather overacting my delight, and that she detected a hollow ring in my congratulations, for I saw her eyebrows raise a little, and she glanced at me curiously. "If I have it," she said, "I owe it to you." "No, no," I answered, "not to me, but to my friend Sherlock Holmes. With all the will in the world, I could... Ah! Sorry. Where's it gone? Sorry. With all the will in the world, I could never have followed up a clue which has taxed even his analytical genius. As it was, we very nearly lost it at the last moment. Okay, so here's where we get the beginning of the resolution of Mary and Watson's relationship. Just before we get to them talking to each other, though, we have one final description of Mary Morstan. She has this white diaphanous material. Diaphanous means light, delicate, translucent. Think about the symbolism behind that word. Mary Morstan, a light and delicate character, translucent, sort of semi see-through, not quite there. This has been Mary Morstan throughout the whole novel, really. And she is pale, frail, in need of help. But the more obvious symbolism is in the word white. Talks about purity, innocence, all of the things that Watson has said before. However, there is a little touch of scarlet at her neck and waist. Now, this scarlet, being red, could link with caution, danger, or romance. And I think particularly before Watson gives her the treasure and the final reveal occurs, for Watson, there really is caution and danger. He's worried about falling in love with her too much. He's worried that they will never be in a relationship together. And that worry stems from his desire for romance. So all three pieces of that symbolism kind of connect to each other. Okay, stuff like the shaded lamp fell upon her. That's a nice metaphor there. But here we have a great oxymoron. Her sweet, grave face. Sweet and grave being the oxymoron, showing that she is a beautiful person, but she is troubled. That there are issues. And grave, linking to the death of her father, graves, death, all that kind of stuff. Her rich cause of luxuriant hair, more description of her. Her absorbing melancholy, that she is absorbed within sadness. And a little bit about what might this sadness relate to. We need to think about whether it is her father, the money, Watson, or the idea that she can't marry Watson. And we'll talk more about this in a minute. But definitely thinking about what is making Mary sad. However, there was a bright flush of surprise, and pleasure coloured her pale cheeks. The idea that she was glad to see Watson. And I've talked at length about Watson being an unreliable narrator, but I think here really Watson's kind of nailed it. That she is very glad to see him. The idea that he has brought her a fortune. Watson is now talking about that he's got her all of this money. However, we get the impression that Mary isn't actually interested in the treasure. The verb glanced. If you glance at something, you're not really paying attention to it. You're just kind of giving it a little look and then moving on. That she spoke coolly enough. That talks about there being no excitement. There being no passion for this treasure. She's just shrugging it off. Oh, is that it? Is that it over there? Okay. Just coolly, rejecting it almost. Here we see Watson talking about social advancement. He talks about there will be few richer young ladies in England. Is it not glorious? He talks about here that she is moving from the lower middle classes right into the upper classes. But Mary doesn't want this. She doesn't want this at all. And really, Watson doesn't want this either. The hollow ring in his congratulations shows that Watson is pretending to be enthusiastic and happy about Mary Morstan getting this money. He doesn't really want her to socially advance, in the same way that Mary Morstan doesn't want to socially advance. And at the end of the chapter, we'll talk a little bit about what that actually represents. However, right now, she sees through Watson pretense. She's kind of getting an understanding that Watson also doesn't want her to have this treasure. Because her eyebrows raise a little and she glances at him curiously. All of that stuff. Just to clarify on that what might be making Mary sad, that there are quite a few things. The death of her father, the worry, about taking on the money. I think it's these two, though. I think the fact that Watson would have been in danger would have made Mary worry a lot. The fear that Watson could be killed would have made her worry a lot. And she, like Watson, is concerned that if she is rich, then she understands that her and Watson cannot marry. It's not done at this time. Okay. So, pray, sit down and tell me all about it, Dr. Watson, she said. I narrated briefly what had occurred since I had seen her last. Holmes's new method of search, the discovery... Sorry, everyone. Holmes's new method of search, the discovery of the aurora, the appearance of Athelney Jones, our expedition in the evening, and the wild chase down the Thames. She listened with parted lips and shining eyes to my recital of our adventures. When I spoke of the dart which had so narrowly missed us, she turned so white that I feared that she was about to faint. It is nothing, she said, as I hastened to pour her out some water. I am all right again. It was such a shock to me to hear that I had placed my friends in such horrible peril. That is all over, I answered. It was nothing. I will tell you no more gloomy details. Let us turn to something brighter. There is the treasure. What could be brighter than that? I got leave to bring it with me, thinking that it would interest you to be the first to see it. It would be of the greatest interest to me, she said. There was no eagerness in her voice, however. It had struck her, doubtless, that it might seem ungracious upon her part to be indifferent to a prize which had cost so much to win. What a pretty box, she said, stooping over it. This is Indian work, I suppose. Yes, it is Bearnair metal. And so heavy, she exclaimed, trying to raise it. The box alone must be of some value. Where is the key? Small threw it into the Thames, I answered. I must borrow Miss Forrester's poker. Okay, just a few little points here. So, when Watson is narrating what happened, she listens with parted lips and shining eyes. This shows that she enjoys listening to the danger, that she gets a thrill out of listening to what Watson and Holmes have gone through. However, she shows a lot of concern for Watson. She turns white. She is scared, worried. It makes her feel fear about Watson. And I think this is what links back to the things that are making Mary sad. That the idea that she's putting Holmes and Watson in danger was making her sad. And that's backed up with when she talks about that it was a shock to me to hear that I had placed my friends in such horrible peril. This is her concern for Watson and for Holmes. So I will tell you no more gloomy details. This is the treatment of women. This is links back to, Watson giving Mary Morstan and Cecil Forrester, giving them a stripped down version of the death of Bartholomew Sholto, trying to spare their feelings by not giving them the full account of what happened. And it talks about the idea that men in the Victorian era needed to wrap up women in cotton wool and keep them safe, that they needed protecting from the realities of the world. It's a purely patriarchal view, and I think it is discrediting to Mary Morstan's character, really. But yeah, Watson here is trying to protect Mary Morstan's fragile emotions, thinking back to that word, the diaphanous material, the white, fragile, translucent, all that stuff. Now this I think talks about Mary not wanting the treasure. So she says to look at the treasure, it would be of the greatest interest to me, she said, but there was no eagerness in her voice. She didn't want to really look at the treasure. She wasn't that bothered. And, that links with these kind of glib statements that she makes afterwards. What a pretty box. Oh, it's so heavy. The box alone must be of some value. All that stuff. It shows that she's not really got her mind on the treasure. Okay. So there was in the front a thick and broad hasp, wrought in the image of a sitting Buddha. Under this I thrust the end of the poker and twisted it outward as a lever. The hasp sprang open with a loud snap. With trembling fingers, I flung back the lid. We both stood, gazing in astonishment. The box was empty. No wonder that it was heavy. The ironwork was 2/3 of an inch thick all round. It was massive, well made and solid, like a chest constructed to carry things of great price, but not one shred or crumb of metal or jewellery lay within it. It was absolutely and completely empty. "The treasure is lost," said Miss Morstan calmly. As I listened to the words and realised what they meant, a great shadow seemed to pass from my soul. I did not know how this Agra treasure had weighed me down until now that it was finally removed. It was selfish, no doubt, disloyal, wrong, but I could realise nothing save that the golden barrier was gone from between us. "Thank God!" I ejaculated from my very heart. She looked at me with a quick, questioning smile. "Why do you say that?" she asked. "Because you are within my reach again," I said, taking her hand. She did not withdraw it. "Because I love you, Mary, as truly as ever a man loved a woman. Because this treasure, these riches, sealed my lips. Now that they are gone, I can tell you how I love you. That is why I said, thank God." "Then I say, thank God too," she whispered, as I drew her to my side. Whoever had lost a treasure, I knew that night that I had gained one. Okay, so lots and lots and lots to get through on this one. This is the final resolution of their relationship. And before we start, you need to get your head around this. The idea that Mary and Watson buy into the Victorian class system, as they both accept that they can't get married if Mary gets the treasure. I've talked about this a lot. This is the idea that people from different classes shouldn't mix, that they both, Mary and Watson, understand that if Mary gets this treasure, then their relationship is done. It's not going to happen. Okay. So yeah. So we find out that the treasure is gone. Watson opens it with trembling fingers. This shows that he believes that it's possibly the end for him and Mary. But there is not one shred or crumb of metal or jewellery lay within it. So it's a nice little metaphor there. Mary responds to that calmly, showing that she's not interested in the treasure. And here is a fantastic metaphor. If Mary and Watson come up as the extract, if that comes up as the question, you need to remember this quote. "A great shadow seemed to pass from my soul." Watson, thinking about the treasure and Mary's progression in life, was a shadow on his soul. It was something that was stopping him from being happy, But now Watson recognises that he can be with Mary, that they can live a life together. And think a little bit about, the light, dark imagery that again, I've talked a lot about with this novel. Here you have some dark imagery. The shadow on his soul is lifting, leading to light. So you could, work from there to say that Mary is Watson's light. Mary is, in many ways, Watson's obsession. Watson considers his feelings to be selfish, disloyal, and wrong. These are all very un-Victorian. You should be happy for other people. You should not be selfish. You should not be disloyal. All that kind of stuff. It's a little point, but he's a little bit un-Victorian in that respect. Now, this metaphor to link with this great shadow that seemed to pass from his soul, he talks about the class difference being a golden barrier. The wealth was a barrier between the two of them. The golden barrier, and it would inevitably lead to them stopping from getting married. So Watson breaks his cover finally, thank God. She looks at him with a quick and questioning smile and asks why he says that. And now this, "Because you are within my reach again." This is the reach of his class, but at the same time, this is very patriarchal. This is Watson talking about wanting to own Mary Morstan, wanting her to be his, wanting to be his possession. And it's kind of Watson's assumption that without the treasure, Mary Morstan is just his. He can grab her, and she's just his. However, we'll see that Mary Morstan reciprocates this. But just before we do, so this treasure, these riches sealed my lips. Again, talking about how he can't talk to Mary about how he feels because he was worried she was going to be in a higher class. And now we get consent. She says, thank God too. She mirrors Watson's words. This shows that Mary Morstan, consents to Watson. And finally, the value of their relationship is shown through the relationship to actual treasure. Whoever had lost a treasure, I knew that night I had gained one. That Watson feels that he has something of value within Mary Morstan. Now, that's it for Mary Morstan. We don't see her again, but I think it's important to note, this. So after this, Mary and Watson get married, but she never features in another Holmes book. In fact, when she dies and Watson moves back in with Holmes, they don't even discuss it. Now, there's not much that you can use of that within your essays. I just think it's important to recognise the contextual relationship of Mary and Watson and understand that Mary Morstan is a disposable character in this. She is a love interest of Watson, and that is it. I think a little bit about what does that show of the treatment of women? That within this novel we have such a prominent female character who is just never ever used again. And this is directly juxtaposed. I don't know whether any of you have seen the Sherlock Holmes TV show, but the character of Mary Morstan is used throughout that show. And I think that shows the treatment of women in modern society versus the treatment of women in Victorian society. She's just there as a plot device for Watson. Okay. So I hope all of that was okay, and I hope that you're all doing well. I will get chapter 12 out as quick as I can. It's going to be a long one. That's going to take possibly 3 videos, chapter 12. But hopefully I shall see you all again soon, and take care.